Chapter 9 review. This is review of the things we've worked on so far in Chapter 9 to hopefully have you review and prepare for the quiz that we are taking on the first part of Chapter 9. So I'm going to go through some of these with you. Whatever ones I don't go through in the video, you can check the notes for the solutions. All right, it says draw a parabola which has the following characteristics. So you should have several points on here, 5 exact points. So we know the vertex is the highest or lowest point on the graph. So the vertex is at 2, -1. So this would be the vertex. The x-intercepts, or zeros, are at 1 and 3. So that's where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So we put points at 1 and 3. So those are the x-intercepts right there, 1 and 3. The y-intercept is 3. So that's where the parabola crosses the y-axis right here. It says using the axis of symmetry, remember the axis of symmetry is the line that goes through the vertex and cuts the parabola in half, and it folds on top of each other. So it says using the axis of symmetry and the y-intercept, plot a 5th point. Well, we know that this y-intercept is 2 spaces or units away from the axis of symmetry. So in order for this point to fold on top of another one, it would have to be 2 spaces away on the opposite side. So there's our 5 points for our parabola. So now we can sketch it, and it is U-shaped. And we should have arrows on there because it continues going up. All right, so now we want to label these things. So pause the video and see if you can label the things shown and then give the values, and then restart the video and see if you got them correct. Okay, the vertex right here, again, is the lowest or highest point, and that ordered pair, the vertex, is 1, 9. The axis of symmetry is the equation of the line that goes through the vertex, and the axis of symmetry goes through at the value, x value of 1, so the equation of the line is x equals 1. You do need that x there because it's not just a point, it's an equation of a line. The x-intercepts are where the quadratic crosses the x-axis, and this quadratic or parabola crosses the x-axis at those 2 points, so the x-intercepts are -2 and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you could also list them as ordered pairs, -2, 0, and 4, 0. The y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis, and that point is right here, and that is the point 8 on the y value, or it's the ordered pair 0, 8. So if it asks for the ordered pair coordinate, then you would give 0, 8. Is it a minimum or a maximum? Well, your graph never goes above this point right here. And so that is the maximum value. What is that value? It is 8. Okay, so now let's work on finding those things without the graph, just from the equation. So we use the equation y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. We use that standard form of a quadratic to find these things. So let's start with number 5 right here. And if we do number 5, the y-intercept is always the c value. So the y-intercept in this case is -24. How do you know? Because the c value is the constant, it's the plain old number. The axis of symmetry is the equation of the line. And the formula for finding the axis of symmetry equation is x equals the opposite of b divided by 2 times a. Your a value is the number in front of x squared. Your b value is the number in front of x to the first. This equation doesn't have an x to the first because your b value is 0. So in this case, my b is equal to 0 because this could say y equals 6x squared plus 0x minus 24. So my b is 0. So my axis of symmetry is x equals the opposite of 0, which of course is just going to be 0, divided by 2 times my a value, which in this case is 6. So I have 0 divided by 12, but 0 divided by anything is 0, so my axis of symmetry is the equation of the line x equals 0. Now, the vertex goes, the axis of symmetry goes through the vertex. So the x value of the vertex is the same x value as the axis of symmetry. So I know the vertex is 0 something. So to find that y value of the vertex, I'm going to plug x into the equation to find the y value. So this would be my y value when x equals 0 would be 6 times 0 squared minus 24. Well, 0 squared is 0, and when I multiply by 6, I still get 0. So my y value is negative 24. My x-intercepts. My x-intercepts are the value of x when y equals 0. So now I take the equation and I put 0 in for y, and I'm trying to find the values of x that make this equation equal to 0. And whenever we're finding the x-intercepts for 0, usually we are going to factor. So I always look for a greatest common factor first. And if you look between 6 and negative 24, 6 goes into each of those. So now this would look like 0 equals 6 times. And then once I factor out the 6, I'd be left with x squared minus 4. So now I'm looking for the values of x that make this equal to 0. So I'm going to factor x squared minus 4. Now this is this fairly easy kind where there's a 1 in front and there's no other GCF. And this is my c value, negative 4. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 4, but that adds to 0x, because remember the b was 0. So what numbers multiply to negative 4 that add to 0? Well, 2 and negative 2. So those are the numbers that go into my parentheses with my x values. So now I have these, I can use the zero product property from here. So what I have is x minus 2 times x plus 2 has to equal 0. And when we have two things multiplied together and the answer is 0, then one of these two things has to equal 0. So you find the value of x that makes it equal to 0. So what value of x would make this equal to 0? Well, if I put in a 2 right here, 2 minus 2 would equal 0. So one of my x-intercepts is 2. Okay, if I put in a negative 2 right here, then negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. And so when I take 0 times anything, it's 0. So those are my x-intercepts, or 0. So I can just write 2 and negative 2, or I could write them as ordered pairs. Okay, on this other example, number 6, what letter am I missing? A, B, or C? Well, this time I'm not missing A because it's a 1. I'm not missing B because it's negative 16. But what I am missing is my C value, because my C value would really be just plus 0. So when I look at my y-intercept is 0. Again, my axis of symmetry is the equation of the line where x is equal to the opposite of b. So that would be the opposite of negative 16 divided by 2 times my a value of 1. So now I have negative 16 divided by 2, which is the opposite of negative 16. So I have 16 divided by 2. So my axis of symmetry is the equation of the line x equals 8. Remember, we do need that x value in there because it's an equation of a line. X equals 8 is the vertical line that goes to the x-axis at 8. So I also know that 8 is the x value of my vertex. So my vertex is 8 something. So to find the y value when x equals 0, I am going to put 0 in for 8. So y equals 8 squared, so I put 8 in for x, minus 16 times 8. And what that gives me is my vertex y value is negative 64. There's my vertex y value when x equals 8. The x-intercepts here, again, are the value of x when y equals 0. So I put 0 in for that f of x, which is like my y. So 0 equals x squared minus 16x. Again, I have a GCF because there's a common letter here. So I am going to factor out an x. And what I'd be left with then is x minus 16. All right, now I use the zero product property. If two things multiplied together equals 0, so x times x minus 16 have to equal 0. So what value of x would you put in here so that when you subtract 16, you get 0? Well, if I put a 16 in there, 16 minus 16 is 0. So one of my values of x is 16. What value of x would I put in here for x to equal 0? Well, just 0. So 0 times anything is 0, and those are my x-intercepts. Then 0 and 16. Again, I could write those as ordered pairs. The ordered pairs would be 0, 0, and 16, 0. You can check the notes for the answer to number 4. Okay, these last 3 questions say solve for x to find the x-intercepts or zeros. That's the exact same thing I was just doing, okay? So you can see that the equation is already equal to 0. So I am going to factor it, okay? I look for a GCF. There is no common number or letter. So then I try to factor it, and again, if there is a 1 in front, then I can look for the two numbers that multiply to C and that add to B. But there is no B because B equals 0. There was like a 0x in here, so B equals 0. So can you think of two numbers that multiply to 81, excuse me, that add up to 0? Oh, that is a 91. I think that's a mistake. I think that's a typo here. I think that is supposed to be 81. So, and hopefully with all that, you figured out that it is 9 and negative 9. So those are what go in my parenthesis. So I put in 9 and negative 9. What goes with it is my variable. Again, now I'm using that zero product property. If these two things multiplied together equals 0, then whatever value of x I put in the parenthesis and add 9 to it, I'm going to have to get 0. So what value of x would you put in here so that when you add 9, you get 0? Well, x equals negative 9. What value of x would you put in here? Well, that would be 9. Now you could also take the equation and set it equal to 0. You could find out, when does x plus 9 equal 0? Well, if you subtract 9 from each side, then you find out it's when x equals negative 9. And you can do the same thing when x equals 9 equals 0, or x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, question number 7 is a little different because it does not equal 0. In order for us to use the zero product property and factor it and find the zeros, it has to equal 0. Well, this one doesn't. But if I subtract 5x from each side, now that does equal 0, and I would get x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. So now I do have it equal to 0, so I'm going to factor it. Okay, there is not a greatest common factor. that goes into all of those numbers, and there's not a common letter. So again, I notice that there's a 1 in front, and so I look for the two numbers that multiply to C that add to B. So can you think of two numbers that multiply to -24 that add to -5? And if you think about it, and you maybe guess and check on your calculator, you'll find out that it's -8 and 3. So now I'm going to factor it with my two parentheses, x minus 8, x plus 3. And again, a lot of these times when you're looking at the zero product property, you can kind of just look at it and find out what value of x would you plug in there so that your answer equals 0. So what minus 8 would equal 0? Well, 8. So x equals 8. What would I put in here so that when I add 3 I get 0? Well, that would be x equals -3. And those are your zeros. So here are my zeros. Here are my zeros. And some of you started to notice that it's kind of in the simple factoring problems, it ends up being the opposite of the numbers you were trying to find. And this last one, this is a tough type of factoring, because what happens in these questions here is we don't have a GCF and we don't have a 1 in front of our x squared. So now the method that I like to use is guess and check. You could use the box method, or you could use one of the other methods we used in class. But when you use guess and check, it helps you understand that whenever you multiply the first term times the first term, it always has to equal that first term in the trinomial, or 3x squared. Well, the only way for me to get 3x squared is not if I have x times x, but if I have 3x times x. So I know that that's going to be the case. Now, I still have to find for these last terms in each parenthesis, I still have to find two numbers that multiply to -8. The problem is when you look at numbers that multiply to -8, you might have 4 and -2, or -4 and +2. But if you look at those, well, in this case, actually one of them does add up to -2 by chance, but typically it won't, because what we have to do is just guess and check. So let's say I try this combination first. And of course, I could also have 1 and -8, or -1 and +8. Those are my combinations to try. So I'm just going to go ahead and circle one and try it. So that means I'm going to put in +4 and -2. Now, the checking part goes like this. You know that the first term times the first term still gives you 3x squared. The last term times the last term does give you -8. But what you have to check is multiplying the outside terms, which gives us -6, and the inside terms, which gives us +4x. And when I add these together, I get -2x, and that is what I want. Now, I guessed right on the first time, but if that combination didn't add up to this middle right here, then I would probably first switch the order and put the 4 last and the -2 in the first parenthesis with the 3, and that would give me a different result. And if neither of those worked and switching the signs, I would try my other pair of factors, 1 and -8. So that was our review of the first few lessons in Chapter 9 in preparation for the quiz. But this is the end of the review video.